For Black History Month, I'm talking about the work of one Black biblical scholar or theologian every day, and today is Jacquelyn Grant's book, White Women's Christ and Black Women's Jesus, Feminist Christology and Womanist Response. Grant's book is, first and foremost, a concise and well-organized summary of second-wave feminist theologians in their attempts to wrestle with traditional doctrines of Christology. Second-wave feminist theologians encountered a bit of a problem when they began to reflect critically on traditional Christological doctrines. On the one hand, Jesus is very male. On the other hand, Jesus is supposed to be a universal representative of all humanity before God, at least as far as the atonement is concerned. On a hand, yet still further, obviously, not all human beings are male. And so it seems like not all human beings are adequately represented in Jesus's masculinity. And so feminist theologians look for ways in which traditional Christology could be rethought in order to better reflect their own experiences as women. And so some of the things that feminist theologians came up with were to emphasize Jesus' divinity as opposed to his masculinity, to emphasize Jesus' fellowship with all human beings, and to emphasize Jesus' servant-based ethic. And as Grant points out, these things work a bit better for white women than they do for women of color. Emphasizing Jesus' divinity, and especially the transcendent elements of this divinity, might not work so well for marginalized communities who are actively suffering, as this just makes Jesus seem indifferent and far away from the suffering that they are experiencing. Emphasizing Jesus' fellowship with all humanity might seem a bit disingenuous coming from a white feminist to other feminists, since white feminists were so reluctant to / directly hostile to the participation of women of color in second-wave feminism as a movement, and also further back in the past actively owned women of color as chattel slaves and forced them into various surrogacy roles. And emphasizing or even idealizing Jesus' servanthood can also be a bit problematic. It sounds a bit disingenuous coming from relatively comfortable white middle-class feminist theologians who can only really relate to servanthood as a kind of spiritualized principle. And it can be hard for poor Black people and other people of color to idealize their service-orientated work when it's such a burden for them. So in place of these emphases, Grant chooses to construct a Christology in which Jesus is the place where God meets and values women of color in their particularity. This might seem like a subtle difference, but it's absolutely worth hearing how Grant is able to foreground the experiences of Black women in her conception of who Jesus is.